So good morning. Welcome to be a Mensch, installment number 20. This is our 20th class of the year, where we have been studying Pirkei Avot, or Ethics of Our Fathers, the teachings from the Talmud that were specifically cultivated, specifically separated from the rest of the Talmud because of their lessons in terms of ethics and morals and how to live our lives. So we have been learning from sages from the Talmud, sages from the Mishnah, who have been teaching us different amazing perspectives, whether it's how to be positive or how to stay focused in life, how to maintain a sense of dignity between each other, etc. So last week we started Mishnah Aleph, which is the first paragraph or the first statement from chapter 2. The first Mishnah of chapter 2, sorry, just got a little distracted there. The first Mishnah of chapter 2, and we did not conclude it. So just to remind you, in the beginning of the Mishnah, sorry, I got a little smaller desk here, so trying to keep up with everything, all the books and stuff. So in the beginning of the Mishnah, we mentioned that Rebbe Omer, we had been quoting from a man whose name was Rebbe, who's fondly known as Rebbe, or our teacher, right? Think of the Rebbe in today's generation. Today is the Rebbe's birthday. We'll talk a little bit about that soon. But just as the Rebbe is called the Rebbe and everybody knows who he is, so to Rebbe, even in the Talmud, even in the Mishnah, is called the Rebbe. And it's always referring to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, or the author, the compiler, the redactor, as he's known, of the Mishnah. And last week, we did the first half of Mishnah Aleph, where he shares with us that he shared with us 3 points. Number one, that a person should always follow the middle of the road. Don't be too extreme to the right, too extreme to the left. He wasn't talking about politically. He was specifically talking about in our character traits, etc. We spoke with the Rambam on that, etc. He continued by warning us, do not try to put mitzvahs in some sort of hierarchical form. In other words, where there's a hierarchy that this mitzvah is more important than another mitzvah, etc. Every mitzvah should be equally important in your eyes. And then he mentioned to us that the same thing is true with regards to the reward or the punishment. In other words, the gain or the loss. That any particular mitzvah or aveira, in other words, a positive commandment or a negative commandment, a transgression or something that we're commanded to do, always make sure you're weighing the gains and losses properly. In other words, just because you're having a monetary loss, because you're paying so much money for a particular mitzvah, there should always be, you should bear in mind the flip side, which is the gain that you have from that mitzvah, spiritually speaking. Okay. Rabbi continues in Mishnah Aleph. You can see right here, Mishnah Aleph part 2. So this is the second part of the same Mishnah. He continues with 3 things that we should always bear in mind, which will help us to stay focused. Mitch, you want to read for us?
Consider the 3 things listed below, and you will not come to an avera. No one exists above you in heaven. There is an eye that sees everything. There is an ear that hears everything, and all your deeds are written and recorded in a book.
So tells us Rebbe, he says all of us struggle with exactly the same thing. We have temptation, we have laziness, we have depression, we have all sorts of things that are tempting us at every single moment of our lives to go against the will of Hashem in a specific way, whatever that particular way is. He says, listen, these are the cardinal 3. Keep these 3 things in mind always. And anytime you have that challenge, anytime you have that you're faced with that choice and you're not sure which way it's going to go, if it's going to go the right way or not, always keep these 3 things in mind, and then you will never come to transgress the will of Hashem. Number 1, remember that there's always an eye that sees everything, right? An eye in the sky. Big brother is always watching. There's a video camera. There's something, right? I remember once somebody was asking me that they were in a little bit of a morally ambiguous situation. In other words, they weren't sure exactly how to deal with a particular situation. And I said to them, listen, I can advise you in this situation. I said, but let me give you advice for the future, right? Sometimes there's comments. We don't know whether a certain comment is on color, off color, etc. We don't know whether something is embarrassing to them. Very often, I said, if we bear in mind this fact, that there's an eye that sees everything, right? So what I was suggesting to this person was, try to think, right, that whatever you're doing right now is being broadcast on a television screen somewhere, right? We all know that right now we're in a Zoom meeting. We're all very careful how we look, what we say, what we do. What are we going to do? Something embarrassing. We're going to do something, right? Many people choose not to show their camera because they're worried. I don't know. In the middle, I'm going to get up. I'm going to go do something, and they're going to see my house is a mess. They're going to see this. They're going to see that, right? Why? Because when we're on the stage, we're very careful about what we do, right? Very often, when people are talking one-on-one, they'll make a comment which may be off color. They'll make a comment which they're not sure if it's the right thing or not. But when it comes to in person, I apologize. When it comes to on stage, they're standing in front of everyone or on a video screen, and many people can see them, etc. They'll be much more careful what they say. When it comes to a comment, they'll think 3 times before they say it. Why? Because they know that my whole, I guess my reputation, my look, my image is on the line. So the same thing is true, and 1,000-fold with regards to Hashem. Every time we're about to choose whether we show something, right? Let's remember that there's an eye that sees. Number 2, there's an ear that hears everything, right? So even, right, it's the same thing with your audio. Zoom meetings are a great example for this, right? You want to make sure your video, you're not doing anything embarrassing. You want to make sure your audio, right? The most embarrassing things happen on Zoom during a work meeting when somebody doesn't have their audio muted, right? They're supposed to have it muted and they don't have it muted at the right time. And together with that, remember that all of your deeds are written and recorded in a book, exactly what what you've been doing, what you haven't been doing, and there's going to come a time where there's going to be judgment. All right, let's dive into this a little bit. Stephanie, you want to read for us? Global surveillance. Go for it.
No.
Stephanie, we can't hear you. I don't know what it is.
You can see me, you can't see you.
Okay, for now we'll move on. Shimon, you want to read for us? Global surveillance?
Global surveillance.
The concept of an eye watching, ear listening, and hand recording is now easier than ever to relate to. With the aid of modern technology, people today can easily watch and listening to happenings on each other on the other end of the world. Certainly, Hashem, who created the universe and who directs everything within it, is constantly aware of everything that happens in it. As David HaMelech says in Tehillim, surely the one who created the ear can hear and the one who formed the eye can see. People act differently when they know that others are watching. We must always bear in mind that Hashem sees everything, and before every action, we must consider whether or not Hashem will be proud of it.
Yes, okay. So this is the point we were just making about modern technology and how relevant it makes this whole point. Hold on. On the bottom here, let me just let someone in. Good morning. Welcome, Philip. And hold on. Just too many things on my screen here now between the cameras, etc. Arnold, why don't you read for us humble as Yaakov Avinu in the Spark section. Do you see that?
Humble as Yaakov Avinu, Rebbe was known for his humility. Once he asked Rabbi Afos to write a letter for him to the king, Antonius, King Antonius. Rabbi Afos began to write as follows. From Yehuda Hanasi to our master King Antonius, Rebbe immediately tore it up and dictated to him as follows. From Yehuda, your servant, to your master King Antonius, Antonius. When Rebbe Afos asked why he was forging his honor, forgoing his honor, Rebbe answered him, am I better than my grandfather, Yaakov? When he sent the messenger to his brother Esau, he said, you shall say to my master Esau,
Go from the bottom.
so has said your servant Yaakov.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just going to mute. Yes, Shimon, you also mentioned that. Let me just, if I can ask everybody to just mute themselves. Thank you. That's much better. First of all, welcome, Rafael. Good to see you all the way
from welcome.
All the way from New York. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, yeah.
We'll have to catch up right after the class. In any event.
Okay, all right.
So this is the author of this Mishnah, right? The author of this Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi himself, says this. And by the way, I promise you, he had much more reason than any of us to actually be called Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. As we see that he's called Rebbe, right? Think about that, like the Rebbe. In that generation, he was literally like the Rebbe. Everybody called him Rebbe, our teacher. Every single person, every Jew around the world called him our teacher because he was able to, he taught everybody around the world. But always we find that together with great leadership, we always find great humility. So this was who Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was. And so it's no wonder that he tells us, that he's the one who tells us, always remember that Hashem is watching. I'd like to share with you a little something from 2 or 3 commentary about the way they translate these 3 things, right? So remember, Rafal, you just joined us, I'll recap again. We say we should always remember 3 things, and this will stop us from transgressing the will of Hashem. Always remember there's an eye that sees, an ear that hears, and that all your deeds are written in a book. So we translated them one way, and that's probably the most contemporary way to translate them. Modern technology really gives us this perspective that we should always remember. If we always thought that everybody that we know was watching what we do, right? We're always careful what we post online, etc., because we know that my grandmother can see it, and my lost friend from high school can see it, and my good friend who I'm going to see tomorrow in shul can see it, and my wife can see it, and everybody together. So obviously, I'm very careful about what I post. But let's quote 2 commentary. Hold on, someone's trying to get in. Welcome, Shlomo. But let's quote 2 commentaries to the way they translate these 3 things that we should keep in mind in order not to do an Aveda, in order not to transgress the will of Hashem. All right, so first of all, let's start with the Meiri. The Meiri translates them as follows. He says, number 1, there's an eye that sees everything. He says that, of course, is to remind us that Hashem sees everything, right? The existence of Hashem. Number 2, he says, an ear that hears reminds us that Hashem doesn't just exist, but that Hashem is actually cognizant of everything that goes on a day-to-day basis. And number 3, he says, we should remember that there's always an accounting, right? So number 1, Hashem exists. Number 2, Hashem sees. Thank you very much. I just want to remind everybody that this morning's class, thank you, Gitti. I just want to remind everybody that this morning's class is supposed to be served together with breakfast. So if you don't have bagels or something, Gitti should bring me pancakes. Her and Menachem were downstairs making pancakes. So please find something, bring something to eat. It's time for breakfast. In any event, so he takes it as a 3-step process. Remember that Hashem exists. That's an eye that sees. Remember that Hashem doesn't exist, but he's intimately involved in everything that happens in this world. That's the ear that hears, right? He's actually involved. And number 3, remember that he actually has an accounting for all of us with regards to our deeds, what we do, and that's what means he writes them in a book, and we talk about that always in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. However, Rabbeinu Yonah, who is another commentary, Shimon, that's a good question. Shimon asked me in the chat, why does God need to record things in a book? God obviously doesn't forget anything. So I will point out, before we move on to Rabbeinu Yonah, which is the second commentary we'll mention on this particular Mishnah, I will point out that when it comes to physical actions which we ascribe to God, Chassidus teaches us that all of them, and I'll mention a few off the top of my head. For instance, when it comes to the Haggadah, when it comes to the retelling of the story of the Exodus of Egypt, the Torah tells us a few times that the Egyptians proclaimed it is the finger of God, it is the hand of God, right? We say that God took us out with an outstretched arm. All of these physical actions that we ascribe to God, Chassidus always explains them as a physical vernacular in order to explain to us, in order to help us relate with it. But on God's level, it's referring to some sort of spiritual energy with the way he interacts with the world. So with regards to God recording in a book, I would say the same thing. There's obviously no physical book up above, and I don't think that a physical book would be enough to, especially when we're learning this Mishnah, to transcribe literally all of our deeds, every single thing we do. That would be impossible to write down in a book. Obviously, it's referring to some sort of spiritual way that God interacts with the world in a way of judgment, that he records everything, and therefore he holds us accountable. And this is what the Meiri is sharing with us, that we should realize, we should recognize that everything that we do is not just that God exists, not just that God is aware and cognizant of everything we do, but that he also holds us responsible. Okay, let's move on to Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is another commentary, and he explains as follows. He says, each of these things is referring, and we spoke about this before, that every single human being in this world interacts with the world in 3 ways: thought, speech, and action. He says, if you pay attention to these 3 things, he says, this is referring to these 3 levels. Seeing is something we usually refer to actions, right? We don't say that somebody sees your thoughts or sees your speech, right? We always say when someone sees what you're doing, right? In other words, so we should be aware of the fact that Hashem sees everything that we do. But then you can have a human being who says to himself, okay, so I'll make sure when I drink, I'm drinking kosher. When I eat, I'm eating kosher. I'll make sure that when I don't hit anyone, I don't cheat anyone, etc. Those are all the things that I do, right? But what about my speech? God's not paying attention to my speech. Comes the Mishnah, continues, and says, no. God is intimately involved in your speech. He knows everything, intimately involved in your actions. He knows all of your actions. That's the eye that sees. And also ear that hears your speech. He's listening to all of your speech. And the same thing with regards to your thoughts. A person will say, my thoughts are not necessarily being watched by God at every moment. No. Everything is recorded in a book, refers to not just your thought and speech, but in addition to that, even your thought. This is obviously not the literal translation, because the word in the Mishnah is deeds. It says all of your deeds are written and recorded in a book, but at least it's another way of looking at it, that everything is in the book. All right, let's keep going in the text here. Word power. I always love word power because they take the words specifically from the Mishnah, the exact words, and they break them down as per the Hebrew word specifically in order to teach us something. So let's start, even before we get into any of it. The words "dam alamayla mimach" are the words which remind us that there's something above you always. Raphael, would you like to unmute yourself and you can read for us?
No, I can't. You go ahead. Don't worry. I got my glasses off.
So Shlomo, why don't you read for us in the word power, starting with "dam alamayla mimach"? Know what's above you, and then let's keep going. Go ahead.
These words can also mean, can also be read as follows. Da, you should know that Maila, that depends on what happens above in the spiritual worlds. Mimach is from you and dependent upon your actions. For example, when you act mercifully, Hashem's attribute of mercy is aroused above.
Okay, so this is actually something that I didn't read in the book beforehand, but I had prepared in order to share. So this comes from the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and he was the teacher of the Alter Rebbe. And this is one of his most famous sayings, by the way. Chassidim, if you ask a Chassid anywhere in the world, if they'll know anything from the Maggid, they'll know this. What does he say? Da, he says, right? He takes this a whole different direction. He says way more than thinking about the fact that Hashem is watching you and surveillance, all that. Of course, that's the little transition clause. But he says, da, you should know. Malemaila, what is above, mimach is from you. Okay, so let me rephrase that. The literal way to translate it would be da malemaila mimach. Know what is above you. He is saying, know that what is above is from you. In other words, he's pointing out to us that everything that we do in this world causes something to happen in the spiritual realms. We think we're just putting on tefillin and it's just me wrapping some black boxes around my arm. No. It's connected to some major spiritual energies that are going up above there. In fact, Hasidus teaches that when we put on tefillin, we cause God to put on tefillin. And there's a whole discussion about what that means for God to put on tefillin. Again, Shimon, we're not talking on a literal level that God puts black boxes on his head, nor that God has a head, but rather that God there's a spiritual equivalent to us putting on tefillin, which God then shines down that radiance to us. Every time we shake a lulav, we eat a matzah, we eat maror, we tell over the story of Mitzrayim, whatever mitzvah it may be. And here they're pointing out much more than mitzvahs. Even just when we act mercifully to another person, Hashem acts mercifully to us. Right? We always talk about the fact that we should always act with other people the way we want God to act with us. Right? This is one of the sources of that point. Da, you should know, malamaila, that whatever is above, whatever is going on spiritually above, mimach, comes as a result of your actions. Shlomo, finish off for us. Lidei aveira. So then we say, you should remember three things which will help you not come to an aveira. What do those words teach us? These words
can also mean the handles of an aveira. At first, the Yetzer Hara tries to lead us to do things that aren't actual aveiras. But like a handle that opens a door and brings you closer to them, through these small permissible acts, he slowly introduces you to sin, starting small, but eventually taking you very far off. Keeping this Mishnah in mind will help you avoid these little handles and certainly real aveiras.
Okay, so this is from the Medrash Shmuel, which is one of the foremost commentary. We've mentioned him many times before during the Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of Our Fathers class. But before we do so, let me point out that he's basing this on a famous Talmudic saying. The Talmud tells us, I forget the opening statement. The opening statement is something about how the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is witty, is sly. I forget the exact words for that, but the end of the statement is Hayom Omer Lo Kach, Asay Kach. Today he tells him, do as follows. Tomorrow he tells him, do a little more, until eventually he brings you to an aveira. In other words, not always does our evil inclination or our, the negative side of us, not always does he start right away by telling us, you should sleep with that person's wife. That would be ridiculous. We would never listen to him. Right? We'd be like, that's not allowed in the Torah. Of course I would never do that, right? Never does he walk over to us and say, you should eat a cheeseburger at McDonald's. He would never do that. He knows we're not going to do that. What does he do instead? Instead, he says, no. Why don't you not daven with a minyan this morning? You're like, not daven with a minyan? It's not even an avera. I'm still davening. I'm still going to put on tefillin. I'm just not going to daven with a minyan. Or whatever it is, these handles towards an avera. In other words, he tells you, just don't do it properly. Don't get the best will of an esrog. No, he starts off with the small things because he knows we'll say, that's not a big deal. That's not my fight. My fight is much greater than that. But it starts slow and he builds it up slowly until, before we know it, we're literally committing the most egregious sins that there are on the planet. And I know I'm not giving me perhaps the most practical examples for everybody in the room. I know some of you and I don't know others of you. And I know some of you in certain ways and others of you in other ways. But we can all apply this in our own way. We all know what that small step is that the Yetzer Hara starts with that and says, why don't you just do this, Avera? Just do this, or don't be so careful at this point. And eventually it leads to much more terrible things. Steve, can you read for us the connection section?
Yes. The two parts of this Mishnah are related. Keeping in mind that Hashem is always watching makes it easier to do each mitzvah, big or small, with greater care. We know that Hashem is watching with delight as we fulfill his will. So, which two parts of the Mishnah is he referring to? So this is last week's study. And I know most of you were here last week, but for those of you that weren't, I'll recap, excuse me. Last week we learned about the fact that we should not judge mitzvahs big or small. Says, I don't know who this is actually. Let me look it up. Hold on. This is from the Shalah, or the Shnei Luchot HaBrit. In other words, he says, you want to be able, right? It's hard sometimes not to judge a mitzvah. What do you mean? For doing this, the whole world will look at me like I'm the big, right? By the way, moral acts are a great example. For sleeping with someone else's wife, of course I would never do that. Are you kidding me? I would lose my stature. I'm a teacher. I'm a proper businessman. I'm a real estate broker. I'm a whatever I am. Nobody would even everybody would look at me like I fell off the moon, because here in America, are you kidding me? Part of the Me Too movement is the most terrible thing in the world. But for me to just eat a little something, which is even really kosher, it's just not perfectly kosher. Nobody's going to judge me for that. Nobody's even going to care. So it's hard to look at things as if they're not equal. What do you mean? Meaning as if all the mitzvahs are equal and everything is the same. Some mitzvahs are a much bigger deal to me than others, right? Reminds us this, he says, look, you want to have that perspective? Here's how to have that perspective. Don't always look at it just as if there's a video camera watching you or as if other people are watching you, because other people are not always accountable in the same way that Hashem is. But think about it the way Hashem looks at it. Hashem looks at it as if every single mitzvah is exactly the same. Hashem is always watching you. So therefore, every mitzvah should be equal in your eyes, whether you do it or whether you don't do it. All right. Ron, did you know? Hold on. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's the action that counts. The Mishnah says that a person's actions, but not his thoughts, are recorded in a book. This is because even if someone thinks about or plans to do an avera, but doesn't actually do it, it is not held against him.
Okay, so this section is clearly disagreeing with the Rabbeinu Yonah. It's a different commentary. He's pointing out that that thought is not mentioned in this Mishnah. And the reason why thought is not mentioned in this Mishnah, he says, because thought is just us being who we are. In other words, very often, thought is just us being who we are. What does that mean? Thought is us being human beings that have challenges, that have struggles, etc. Thank you. Thought is just us being who we are as a human being with struggles. The Alter Rebbe and Tanya points out that we should never let our thoughts discourage us or make us depressed, right? If we wake up one morning or whatever, or we're walking around one day and we meet a particular person and the most immoral thought of everything in the world occurs to us, says the Alter Rebbe, you should never let that get you depressed. Why? That just means you're human. It means you have challenges. Great. If you didn't allow that to enter the realm of speech and action, you're doing amazing. Would it be great if you didn't have those thoughts? Yeah, sure. But as a human being, we all have thoughts. We all have thoughts to do negative things. Reminds us this Mishnah, thought is not included in what Hashem writes down. Hashem doesn't write down every single thought that we do. Hashem writes down only the actions and the speech that we do. So we have a chance when it enters the realm of our thought to say, this one I discard. This one I don't pay attention to. It doesn't get me down. I'm a human being. I'm allowed to have negative thoughts, but I don't allow it to enter the realm of speech and action. Okay, let me take a question. I think it's from a prior point that we mentioned. Rabbi, I know that Hashem is always watching me. I get that, but truthfully, that makes it more daunting and more insurmountable for me to do a mitzvah. Recognizing that I am Ishlamil, who is grossly inadequate to properly do mitzvahs as prescribed by Hashem. It's true, and I think that's the point here. We're trying to make it more daunting. It shouldn't. If this is causing guilt by you and it's not allowing you to do anything, then yes, that's not the goal we're looking for. What we're looking for is this. By the way, at the same point, at same token that it's daunting, it's also empowering, right? Because how often do we think you're thinking about the daunting because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something that Hashem doesn't want me to do, and Hashem is always watching, so He for sure sees what I want, right? But think about the other side, right? If we start going with the path of, oh, Hashem doesn't really follow everything that I do, so then every mitzvah that I do is worthless. I put on tefillin, Hashem really cares? He doesn't care if I put on tefillin or not today. But the truth is, it's not that way. The truth is that, yes, Hashem looks at every single mitzvah that we do. And that's why they use this term here in the connection section, which is, I think, when the question was brought up. We know that Hashem is watching with delight as we fulfill His will. The point is, yes, it's daunting. Yes, but we should also remember that Hashem never expects of us any more than we can do. So we should do as many mitzvahs as we can. And Hashem is extremely proud of us for doing those mitzvahs. But we should recognize that those mitzvahs literally make or break Hashem. Those mitzvahs literally mean the world to Hashem. I know that presents a philosophical difficulty about, oh, how does that work, that Hashem cares about a little mitzvah that I'm doing? And we could talk about that in a different class. But the truth is that, yes, Hashem 100% cares about every single mitzvah that we do. Okay, any other questions? Because we're gonna call this a day for today. I unmuted you all. If anybody has a question, feel free to